Welcome to Update One, the podcast of the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. Update One provides a forum for listeners to learn about national stories focusing on news, politics, and current events. Now, the latest edition of Update One.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Update One. This is your host, Shannon Fisher. Today, we're going to talk about cybersecurity for journalists. We're only now starting to become very aware of how much of our data is being harvested on the internet, and things that we are doing online are not safe. And so we need to take extra measures to protect them. Most of us know about antivirus software and anti-spyware software, but there are threats far beyond that. And as journalists, we have so much to protect. We need to protect our data. We need to protect our stories. We need to protect our sources. We need to protect our files. There are phone apps that we can use to encrypt our phone calls so that they cannot be intercepted. Services like Signal and Wire. And then there are email services that are completely encrypted, and there are virtual private networks. Today, we are going to talk to someone at the forefront of just that, Andy Yen. He's the CEO and founder of
Proton Mail, which is an encrypted email service, and they also have virtual private networks, and we'll get into what all of those things are once we start talking to Andy. Andy, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Sure. So first, a lot of people don't know about encryption. If you could explain what is encrypted email.
Yeah, well, it's a complicated concept to explain, especially in the journalism field. Some of the correspondents that have the highest risk jobs are actually war correspondents. And if you're a war correspondent going into a war zone, you'll usually go with a helmet and also a bulletproof vest, right?
Right.
And that's because in a war zone, the threats are very physical and they're very obvious. Now, if you're any other journalist, though, in any other field, in fact, you're facing actually a very similar threat. And the threat is actually, cyber attacks. So this could be, governments, intelligence agencies, anybody who may want to compromise you or compromise your source.
Right.
And this is actually a pretty big risk. So if you think about using communication methods, whether email or other communication methods with your sources, without using encryption, it's sort of like a war correspondent going into a war zone without a helmet. So it's actually very, very essential part of I think the work of everybody in the field to particularly use encryption to protect the communications.
Definitely.
So the way to kind of explain encryption is sort of like it's the helmet that you wear in cyberspace. And what it does is it protects your communications so that no one except for you and the intended recipients can read it. And if you take a system like Proton Mail, which uses end-to-end encryption, this is actually very powerful because not only does it ensure that you and the person who is you're communicating with are the only people that can read your messages. It also ensures that we, as a service provider, can also, not access your messages. So if we were to someday be hacked or breached, or if we were to, get coerced by the government to give up our data, we wouldn't have any data to actually give up that would, reveal sensitive information from your private communications. So that's really the main difference between something like Proton Mail and other systems, like Gmail.
Sure. And Proton Mail is it's free to use, which I think is wonderful. And one of the features is that you can add a password and you can make the email delete itself after a certain period of time. So do you find that a lot of journalists are using your service to communicate with sources?
So, we don't have a lot of information on our users because we're obviously very privacy focused.
Right.
But if you just search on Twitter, Proton Mail, you see it actually showing up quite often on the profiles of, various journalists around the world. New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and you see it in quite a few places. It is a good way to protect your sources because, not only is it encrypted, but you can also get an account in anonymous fashion. So it's in many ways become the preferred channel for sources to communicate with journalists. And we see That's why more and more journalists find it kind of like necessary as part of their jobs to in fact have an account at Proton Mail, because it's a sign that a source can contact you securely.
Definitely. And that is so important in this day and age. And so outside of email, Proton also has a service called a virtual private network. And so this protects your IP address and the files that are on your computer and any other information that you might have digitally. Will you explain what a VPN is?
Yeah, of course. I think maybe I'll go back a little bit into actually the history and the background behind Proton VPN.
Right.
So we were actually at the second Investigative Journalists Conference that was held in Kathmandu, Nepal, and this is held by several journalistic organizations to help journalists who are working in Asia, particularly, do their jobs effectively, especially investigative journalists who are going after government corruption, going after corruption in state companies or in even in the private sector. Especially in Asia, there's certain countries where that line of journalism is particularly risky. And a lot of the journalists who are working in these countries, in fact, are working out of an environment where the internet is not only highly restricted, as in you cannot access a lot of data online because certain sites are just simply blocked. But also the networks are heavily monitored and scrutinized. So they're recording, for example, every single site that you visit. If you make a lot of visits to, for example, a message board where dissidents are, that may put you on a watch list, right? And that could put you at risk. And it's kind of for us living in Western Europe or in the US, we don't kind of have this big brother always looking over our shoulders. But in Asia, in many people who are working in journalism, this can actually be a life and death situation.
Absolutely.
So the purpose of a VPN is it's a way to hide your actual IP address. When you connect to a website, a different IP other than the one that you actually own that is connected to your computer is the one that shows up. It can also allow you to access websites by making it appear that you're coming from a different country. It's also a layer of encryption over your entire internet connection. So whoever is monitoring your internet connection is not able to see what you're visiting, what you're downloading, and what data you're transmitting from your computer to the internet. So it's in many ways a very powerful tool to both secure your privacy and also your security.
Definitely. And so does that work on public Wi-Fi networks?
In fact, it works on any internet connection.
Okay.
So once you turn on the VPN, it establishes an encrypted tunnel between your computer and our VPN servers. And that's secured with 128-bit or 256-bit AES encryption. And there's really no way for any state actors to break into that encrypted tunnel and see your internet traffic.
So having a VPN really enables you to work on public Wi-Fi networks and work at places outside of your private network at home and have confidence that your files are secure and that what you're doing on the internet is secure. That's great.
Yeah, of course. And also, even at home, it's useful to use it, right? Let's say you're an activist in some of these countries where, the situation is really bad. Even at home, they're monitoring your connection, right? So it's something that, we actually recommend just keeping on all the time because it's an additional layer of security that is quite beneficial.
And this, you're to offer Proton Mail for free. I think it's wonderful. And a lot of people out there say, if the software is free, you're the product. But that's not the case with your service. So why did you decide to offer this at no cost?
Well, I think you're entirely correct. Privacy and security ultimately cannot be free, right? And of course, Proton Mail and Proton VPN are sustainable because there are also a large number of users who elect to pay us, right? It's not, you don't need to pay us to use the service, but you can pay us to get additional features. And it's because we have a large support in the community and a significant fraction of paying users that does allow us to, keep the free service around. But the way that we look at this, of course, is the people that often need these tools the most. So these are people, for example, in Russia, in China, or even countries like Iran. They're actually the ones that often have the least ability to pay. So because of that, it becomes very, very essential to make the service free so that these people can use it. Also, communication is very much a two-way street, right? So, if your source wants you to use Proton Mail, but you're not willing to pay for Proton Mail, then that hinders that communication. So, by making it free, we actually make it much more usable at the same time for a much bigger group of people. And that to us, I think, is an important part of our mission. For me personally, I think that is much more important than, for example, maximizing profits.
Sure. And you founded this company in Switzerland, and I read that some of the world's best privacy laws are in Switzerland. So what laws are different there than here?
Switzerland is a bit unique because the country itself, has a very long history, both culturally, economically, and politically of, privacy, security, and also neutrality. And this is kind of a unique combination that you don't find anywhere else. And this is reflected both in the legislation and also the way the legislation is actually enforced. So, here, for example, the courts, the judges, and even the law enforcement, they take a very, pro-privacy view, on many things. And this is advantageous because, that here in the Swiss court system under Swiss law, dissidents, activists, journalists, those are for sure going to be protected. And, I would say in the States, that was also, the case for a long time. But recently, you have seen more incidents of, courts trying to pressure, newspapers and journalists to give up sources, right? And
Sure.
This is something that, given the way that, the Swiss tradition of privacy and security and how, deeply it is baked into the culture here, simply would never be permissible.
Outside of Proton, what cybersecurity tips would you have for journalists to keep everything they have safe?
I think the number one thing is always, awareness, right? Many times, especially nowadays, people really don't have a good sense of, how much information they have out there on the cloud, right? Whether it's Google, Facebook, Instagram, or whatever, we're kind of entering an environment where we're putting out actually a massive amount of information online, and it's there and accessible to governments or anybody who may want to have an interest in getting that data, right? We saw, for example, with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, people who are using Facebook that didn't expect their data to be used in the election,
Right.
inadvertently now had their data being used by the Trump campaign and stories like that. So I think kind of what is important for journalists in particular is, when you're going online using online services, you should think about what data you're putting out there. What is the business model, of this company that you're giving data to, and is that something that you want? Is that someplace you want your data to go? And when you kind of think through that process, then you sort of realize that most of the internet today, Google, Facebook, and these companies, in fact, they don't have your best interest at heart, and their best interest is actually keeping their advertisers happy and not keeping your data safe.
Right. Absolutely.
And sort of that exposes sort of the major conflict that resides today on the internet, and I think that's something that we need to resolve. We obviously take the very pro-privacy stance, right? And we're seeing very good progress in a lot of people, becoming more aware of privacy issues, moving to Proton Mail as a result. But this is going to be a gradual process. But I think it's very important for society as a whole that this awareness increases.
Absolutely. And I mean, it amazes me when I install apps on my phone, all of the permissions that they ask for. A flashlight will ask for access to your contacts. And it is simply amazing to me. We really have to be aware with everything that we do.
Yeah, because the internet is everywhere now, even in places you don't expect it to be. And I think that education hasn't really caught up to that yet.
Everybody out there, check the settings and permissions whenever you're using a website or installing an app. And I know Mozilla has a a privacy-focused web browser out there, and DuckDuckGo is a search engine that doesn't track you. And so there are a lot of things that we can do as journalists for cybersecurity to protect everything you're doing online. Well, Andy, I can't thank you enough for giving us a insight into Proton Mail and all the cybersecurity measures we can take. Is there anything you feel we've left out?
No, I think that's very, very thorough. We work a lot with journalists, and I think the work that you guys are doing is very, very important because, in fact, it is through the press that the awareness of these things, does increase. So, the reporting on both Cambridge Analytica and the other privacy stories, that have happened in the past year, these are all the things that are bringing up the awareness and ultimately leading to the changes that are going to make the world a better place. So I think it's a very important mission, and from the tech side, we definitely appreciate that.
Most definitely. And we definitely appreciate your expertise. So, Andy Yen, thank you so much. And this is Shannon Fisher for Update One.
You have been listening to Update One, a production of the National Press Club's Broadcast Committee. You can comment on this show or any episode of Update One by going to facebook.com/PressClubDC or on Twitter @PressClubDC. Thanks for listening to Update One.